It's about what?
I'm sad for those who don't feel that they are loved in order to work in this life. It's about the things that matter to me, which I think are more important because it allows you to think about what's just been said.
There are people who exist in this world not simply to occupy space, but to leave something behind, something warm, something enduring, something that continues to breathe long after they are gone. Fred Rogers was one of those people. For decades, he sat across from a television camera and spoke directly to the hearts of children across America, assuring them that they were loved exactly as they were. No conditions, no exceptions, just pure, unwavering affirmation. The world adored him for it. And in many ways, the world still does. But here is something worth thinking about. We often place our heroes on pedestals so high that we forget they are human. We forget they wake up tired. We forget they argue, worry, doubt themselves, and sometimes feel the weight of life pressing down on them just like everyone else. Fred Rogers was no different. And the woman who knew this better than anyone, the woman who shared his bed, his kitchen table, his quiet mornings, and his most private fears, was his wife, Joanne Rogers. Before her own passing, Joanne spoke with a rare and courageous honesty about the man behind the cardigan. What she revealed was not a scandal. It was not something shameful. In fact, in many ways, what she shared makes Fred Rogers even more extraordinary than the world already believed him to be. Because the truth she told was this: goodness is not something you are born with and simply carry effortlessly through life. Goodness is something you choose. Every single day. Even when it is hard. Even when no one is watching. And Fred Rogers chose it, again and again, until the very end. To understand the man, you first have to understand the mission. When Fred Rogers stepped in front of a television camera for the first time, he was not trying to become famous. He was not chasing applause or ratings. He was responding to something that troubled him deeply: the way television was being used. He looked at early children's programming and saw chaos, noise, and a medium with enormous potential being squandered. He believed television could do something powerful. It could reach into the living rooms of ordinary families and speak directly to children in a way that honored their intelligence and their emotional lives. So he built a neighborhood. A quiet, gentle, intentional neighborhood where a man in a soft cardigan would come home every day, change his shoes, and speak to children as though they were the most important people in the world, because to him, they genuinely were. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood premiered on PBS in 1968 and ran for over 3 decades, ultimately producing nearly 900 episodes. That number alone is staggering. But more staggering still is the consistency of its message across all those years. You are special, your feelings matter, and you are loved. The show moved slowly. Deliberately so. In an age when other children's programs were filled with flashing images and rapid-fire humor, Fred Rogers chose stillness. He chose long pauses. He chose eye contact with the camera that felt almost uncomfortably personal, because he wanted every child watching to feel as though he was speaking only to them. And it worked. For children growing up in broken homes, in neighborhoods where safety was not guaranteed, in families where love was complicated or conditional, those 30 minutes with Mr. Rogers were sometimes the only consistent warmth in a day. He brought guests onto the program who represented the full breadth of human experience. Musicians, scientists, artists, people with disabilities, people of different backgrounds and professions. Each person was welcomed with the same gentle curiosity. Each person was treated with dignity. Fred modeled something on that program that he also lived in his private life: the belief that every human being carries inherent worth. Joanne Bird was never a woman who needed someone else's story to define her own. Born in Jacksonville, Florida in 1928, she grew up in a home where curiosity and music were celebrated. By the time she reached adolescence, it was already clear that she possessed an extraordinary gift for the piano, not just the technical precision that formal training could produce, but something deeper. She played with feeling, with intention, with the kind of soul that draws an audience in without asking for their attention. She studied music performance at Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida, and later continued her education at Florida State University and Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh. She was not simply building a resume. She was becoming someone, a woman of substance, of independence, of genuine artistic vision. She performed as a concert pianist and taught at several institutions, including Chatham College and Carlow College, where she shaped the musical lives of young students with the same warmth and rigor she brought to everything she did. It was at Rollins College that her path first crossed with Fred Rogers. Both were music majors. Both were serious about their craft. But more than that, both carried an unusual quality that set them apart from their peers, a genuine, unhurried interest in the inner life of other people. Joanne was not easily impressed. She had seen enough of the world to recognize performance when she encountered it. What drew her to Fred was not charm or charisma. It was the quality of his attention. The way he listened. The softness with which he moved through the world. They built their connection slowly, the way all truly solid things are built, through shared music, honest conversation, and the accumulation of small moments that add up to something neither person could quite name until it was already undeniable. When Fred left for New York to begin working at NBC, they sustained their relationship through letters, handwritten, patient, full of the kind of depth that text messages will never quite replicate. And when his proposal arrived in one of those envelopes, Joanne's response was immediate and certain. She said yes before she had even finished reading the words. They married in 1952. They would remain married for over 50 years. There is a version of Fred Rogers that exists in the public imagination. Serene, endlessly patient, almost saintly in his composure. And while that version is not entirely false, it is incomplete. The real Fred Rogers was something more interesting than a saint. He was a man who worked very hard at being who he appeared to be. Joanne has said this plainly in interviews over the years. Her husband was genuinely kind. Yes, but kindness, she emphasized, was not something that came without effort. It was a daily practice. A daily decision. Fred chose patience when frustration would have been easier. He chose gentleness when the world gave him reasons to harden. He chose to believe in the goodness of people even when that belief was tested. And he did this not because it was effortless, but because it mattered to him more than almost anything else. He kept routines that reflected the same discipline and intentionality he brought to his television work. He swam every morning. He prayed. He maintained his weight at exactly 143 pounds for most of his adult life, not out of vanity, but because that number held private meaning for him. 1 letter in I. 4 letters in love. 3 letters in you. It was a small, quiet ceremony he performed with his own body, a way of carrying a message he believed in so deeply that he wanted it embedded in his physical self. But Fred was also a man who struggled. He worried about whether he was doing enough. He carried the weight of knowing that millions of children looked to him as a source of comfort, and that responsibility pressed on him in ways that were not always visible. Joanne saw this. She saw the tired days when the emotional labor of caring so much left him depleted. She saw the moments of self-doubt that he never brought to a microphone or a camera at home. The balance of roles was not always perfectly even. Joanne has spoken candidly about the fact that she was typically the one who handled discipline when it came to their 2 sons, James and John. Fred, true to his nature, was the gentle presence, sometimes to a fault. Parenting required a harder edge on certain days, and Joanne provided it. She was not simply the supportive wife waiting in the wings of a great man's story. She was an equal partner who understood that loving someone well sometimes means being honest with them, challenging them, and doing the things they find difficult. Their marriage was not a fairy tale. It was better than that. It was real. The phrase awful truth sounds ominous. It conjures images of hidden scandals or dark revelations. But the truth Joanne Rogers ultimately shared about her husband is not scandalous. It is, in its own quiet way, far more moving than any scandal could be. Fred Rogers was diagnosed with stomach cancer in the final months of his life. He had noticed discomfort for some time, the kind that a disciplined, private man tends to push through without alarm, attributing it to ordinary causes. He adjusted what he ate. He tried to manage the unease on his own. But the pain grew, and when they finally sought answers, the news was serious. The cancer had already spread. The options were limited. The outlook was grim. What followed were months that tested everything. His body, his spirit, and the bond he and Joanne had spent 5 decades building. Fred had always been the steady one, the anchor, the one whose calm made the people around him feel safe. Now the roles shifted. Joanne became his caregiver. She held space for his pain in a way that required a different kind of strength than anything she had been asked for before. She watched a man full of life confront his own limitation, and she did it with the same steadiness and love that had defined their partnership from the beginning. Even in those final weeks, Fred did not withdraw from life entirely. In January 2003, just weeks before he passed, he appeared as the Grand Marshal of the Rose Parade in Pasadena, California, a moment of brightness and commitment that spoke to who he was at his core. He showed up. He kept his promises. He honored his love for the people who celebrated him, even when showing up cost him something. After surgery to remove part of his stomach, he came home. And at home, in the quiet of familiar rooms, he found moments of peace at the piano. The instrument that had connected him to Joanne, to music, to something larger than words. He played when his body allowed it. He rested when it didn't. And on February 27, 2003, surrounded by family, Fred Rogers died quietly at home. He was 74 years old. 4 years after Fred's death, Joanne kept many of these details close. She understood the magnitude of what her husband had meant to the world, and she was protective of his image, not because she wanted to create a myth, but because she respected his privacy even after he was gone. The persona he had built was not dishonest. It was simply incomplete. But as time passed, Joanne came to believe that hiding Fred's humanity was its own kind of dishonesty. The man she loved was not a myth. He was not a symbol. He was a person who struggled and doubted and got tired and needed to be cared for. And sharing that truth, she realized, did not diminish his legacy. It deepened it. Because if Fred Rogers, a man who chose kindness as deliberately and consistently as he did, was still a flawed, struggling human being, then perhaps the rest of us have more reason for hope than we realized. In interviews and documentary appearances, including the widely acclaimed 2018 film Won't You Be My Neighbor, Joanne opened windows into the private life she and Fred had shared. She spoke of his humor in dark moments, the way his lightness did not vanish under illness but simply changed shape. She shared the words she spoke to him near the end, telling him that she and their sons were going to be okay, that he could go in peace. And she described feeling, in the moment of his passing, that he had done exactly that. He went peacefully. She believed, with everything in her, that he went with joy. She also spoke honestly about grief, not the grief of sudden loss, but the slow, exhausting grief of a long marriage ending. She refused to romanticize it. Some days, she said, she felt energized. Other days, she felt completely emptied out. Grief did not follow a timeline or a script, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. That honesty, practical, unflinching, warm, was pure Joanne.